When you have an opportunity to simplify an important obligation and save the taxpayers' money, wouldn't you jump at the chance? That's the idea behind vote centers. In May 2006, Indiana's General Assembly sent out the call for a more efficient way to deliver one of the government's most important services, voting. The forward-looking county clerks of Cass, Tippecanoe, and Wayne stood up and pointed west to Colorado, where vote centers first started. Indiana's Vote Center pilot program began in 2007. In Indiana, most voters have only one correct place to vote on Election Day. If they don't vote at that specific place, then their vote doesn't count. Even worse than that, not having your vote counted, is that you often wait in long lines just to discover that you are in the wrong place. But with vote centers, a voter can go to any of the vote centers operating in their county, so there isn't any wrong place to vote. Since we're discussing vote centers, we should cover some terminology. You've probably heard of satellite absentee voting, or what some people call early voting. Vote centers and satellite voting are different ideas that both exist thanks to technology. The term vote centers refers only to voting that occurs on Election Day. Vote centers replace traditional precinct polling places. Satellite voting, on the other hand, occurs before Election Day. It is really in-person absentee voting. The video you are seeing is one of the satellite absentee sites that operated in Tippecanoe County in the last election. All the vote center pilot counties have satellite absentee voting, so that's probably what makes people tie the two ideas together. A satellite or early voting location is exactly like voting in person absentee in the clerk's office, except that the sites are usually located in places that are easy to get to. In pilot counties, they are located in grocery stores, community centers, and even a mall. Any county can have satellite absentee voting, but most don't because it costs a lot of money. But let's get back to vote centers. Vote centers look like a regular precinct polling place.
Thank you.
They're open the same hours, have the same posters, and have sample ballots. There are a few differences. For one thing, they tend to be bigger and have more machines and workers. In regular precinct voting, the law requires that there be a minimum of 5 poll workers per precinct. There may be as many as 9. In a presidential election where 700 or so people will vote, it makes sense to have that many poll workers. But in a primary, many precincts will see fewer than 100 voters. Does it really make sense to pay 5 people to sit there for 12 hours and read, chat, knit, and occasionally check someone in? With vote centers, election officials can vary the number of workers to better match the expected turnout. So for the presidential election, there may be 15 workers at a single vote center. That same center might have 4 workers for a primary election with few contests. And in case you're wondering, workers at vote centers are still recruited by the political parties. The parties who appear first on the ballot selects the person in charge and half of the rest of the workers. The other party selects the workers, so vote center elections are still under bipartisan control. So what is the biggest difference between vote centers and precinct polling places? Computers. Instead of the paper poll books we have used for voting for the last 100 years, poll workers check in voters using a computer. These computers link all the vote centers in real time, so when a voter checks in, every other vote center knows it. That way, a voter cannot vote twice. So how do vote centers work? Every voter has been mailed a postcard before the election. On one side of the card is a list of vote centers, and on the other is the voter's information and precinct. Voters are asked to bring their postcards with them to the vote center because it speeds up check-in, but if they don't, it's not a problem. When voters arrive, they give their photo ID and their postcard to one of the judges. Instead of finding the voter's name in a paper poll book, the judge can scan the barcode. The information on the screen is exactly the same as the information that appears in the paper poll books, except that the computer is a lot easier to read. The judge verifies the photo ID and address. Voters sign their postcards, and they are kept by the vote center. The postcard replaces the paper poll list. Voters then receive the correct ballot for their precinct. No matter which vote center the voter selects, every vote center has every ballot available. Although all of the pilot counties use touchscreen election equipment, it is possible to use paper ballots for vote centers. The actual voting part of the process is pretty much the same as with precinct voting. Some people worry that their ballot isn't secret because they were checked in with a computer. But the computer system is totally separate from the voting machines, so their ballot is secret. Although this next little fact is probably only of interest to elected officials and political consultants, the results of the election are still reported by precinct. So why should we use vote centers? Well, the biggest reason is that voters prefer vote centers. Let's hear from a few voters.
I think they're wonderful. I walked here from my work, so just around the corner, so it made my life way easier. So I think they're a wonderful thing.
Was your polling location close to your work also, or was it?
No, I'd have to. It was close to my house, so I would have had to drive from work to go vote. So,
in a word, it's easy. When I first was able to vote at 18, I had to stand in line at my old elementary school to get in on Tuesday. Had to wait to vote. Had to get out of school early to do it. Nowadays, I can walk into my grocery store before the election, and if I normally already know who I'm going to vote for, so I'm able to vote then. If I have to wait till election day, it's even easier because I can go to any one of the vote centers. It doesn't matter where I am in town. I don't have to go back to my house or my neighborhood to vote.
Oh, I've been a registered voter in the county for approximately 42 years.
And if you had to compare the old process to the new process, what would you say?
I like the new process.
Well, it's very convenient, first and foremost, and it seems like it's an idea that's working out for us here. So, but previously you had to know where you voted, which is fine, and if it was crowded there, you simply had to wait.
Being able to vote wherever you want is extremely important because with kids, it's kind of hard to go far, especially during lunchtime and the little bit of time I do have to travel.
Have you been voting in the county for a long time?
About 10 years.
Okay. So you've done both the previous way of voting and the vote center?
Correct, I have.
What's your preference?
I like this way. Actually, it was very easy. I had a choice of about 3 different spots, and the electronic portion was very easy.
Here's what researchers from Ball State University's Bowen Center found when they conducted research on vote centers.
We conducted actually 2 different studies on vote centers. The people still loved it. We gave out questionnaires to the people that were using vote centers, asked them to compare it to what had gone before in terms of precinct voting. Overwhelmingly, over 80% of the people preferred vote centers to vote as compared to their old neighborhood precincts. Somewhat surprising. We thought maybe they would like to stay in the old neighborhoods. But indeed, the way the vote centers were placed around the counties, they liked it.
Voters clearly prefer vote centers. But what do the people who work the election, manage them, and pay for them have to say?
I feel you're more comfortable, more at ease, especially for the senior citizens and new voters.
Most of the older generation that before 2008, they say that this is a good, fast process. They like it because it's convenient. They like the hours. They like the locations.
I've worked for doing voting for 6 years. People stay busy, the days feel shorter, and it's more efficient. So,
how can vote centers save taxpayers money? Well, for one thing, vote centers use expensive election equipment a lot more efficiently. In a precinct election, you send out equipment based on how many people will vote. In a small precinct, you might need 1.2 machines. Well, obviously, you can't send out part of a machine, so you send 2, even though that second machine will be mostly unused. The Indiana Fiscal Policy Institute estimates that every county in Indiana could save money by using vote centers. Vote centers also save money because we don't have to find, train, feed, or pay nearly as many poll workers. Statewide, we need 25,000 poll workers for each election.
Our county can save approximately $200,000 a year on election costs. We would reduce our poll workers from 640 poll workers per election to approximately 120. We have an aging poll worker population in our county. The average age of a Democrat poll worker from 2008 was 72. The average age of a Republican poll worker in 2008 was 73. And as this population ages, we have to find ways to replace these workers. It is a lot easier to replace 120 workers as opposed to trying to find 640 poll workers.
During my first election, I was stationed at Cary Quad on Purdue's campus. All day, me and my fellow poll workers had 5 voters all day. 5. If you think about that being $1,000 per polling place, that makes it about $200 per vote we got in. Compare that to $1 per voter now, and I think it just makes more sense the way we're doing it now.
County Council member Kevin Underwood says vote centers make sense.
From a county council's perspective, vote centers are not only excellent for the voters because it's more convenient, but for us as a county council, we really like it because we're saving money. When we're looking at potentially saving $60,000 to $70,000 per election cycle, that is equivalent to as many as 2 public safety officers.
Richmond Mayor Sally Hutton says she loves vote centers.
I love the vote centers. Here in Richmond-Wayne County, we've been using them for 4 years now. It's convenient for the voters. It's easier to get poll workers. It saves the city and the county a lot of money, and it certainly has encouraged more people to get out to vote.
So why do election administrators prefer vote centers? That's simple. Vote centers are just plain easier. Joanne Stewart, Wayne County Clerk, says they're easier to manage, with more control over the election process.
They're easier to manage primarily because we're using fewer poll workers. We have fewer locations that we have to make sure that open on time, that equipment gets there. We don't have delivery of equipment happening when the equipment is, if there's no one there. With 58 precincts, they would leave the equipment outside and the truck would leave. We have more control over the entire election process.
So what are the myths about vote centers? Well, some people are concerned that vote centers might disenfranchise older voters, the rural voters, or voters without transportation. Well, that's simply not true. Turnout went up. A study in Tippecanoe County showed that 75.6% of voters over the age of 65 voted in the 2008 presidential election. Only 68.5% of that age group voted in the supposedly more convenient precinct polling places in the 2004 presidential election. Clearly, the older voter prefers vote centers. And 72.3% of rural voters voted in the 2008 election, compared with 66.4% of all voters. So obviously, vote centers do not inconvenience the rural voter. Another myth is that vote centers are somehow less reliable than precinct polling places. The claim is the results can't be audited or recounted. Again, not true. The State Board of Accounts conducted a recount of vote center elections in 2008.
Since that was the first voting center recount that the Board of Accounts has done, we've found that it worked just as well as the recounts by precinct. We saw no problems with the way the votes were obtained and the results presented to us.
So what is ahead for vote centers? With legislative action, all counties will have the option of using the vote center concept.
If we would have to go back, it's money that Cass County would have to spend that we don't have.
Other counties would also like the option to use vote centers. The LaPorte County Clerk says that this should be an option for all counties.
I'm jealous of the 3 pilot counties that the state has chosen. I think it should be an option to all counties of the state.
There is no question. Vote centers work. Voters prefer them. They save money.
This just works out for everybody. Both parties have worked on it together to make it work, and it has worked tremendously well.
Vote centers. They just make sense.